Hello and welcome to A-Team Group's Data Management Summit USA Virtual 2021. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, OneTrust Data Governance, Solidatus and Luxoft, and our gold sponsors, Alveo, Bureau van Dijk, Didactics, QSIP Global Services, the Derivatives Service Bureau, SmartStream, BigID, ActiveNav, Kinbland and TickSmith. You can connect with your peers on the networking page, and if you have questions for the speakers, please use the panel to the right of the video. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the summit.
In the meantime, we will move on to our next session, which is a panel discussion around the science of data discovery and the art of implementation for business value. We are, as you may have noticed, mixing things up a little bit today. We like to move things around sometimes. And so for this session, I'm handing back the moderation duties to Sarah. So that's Sarah Underwood of A-Team Group. And I notice a bunch of my good friends from New York on this session. Hi guys, great to see you. Look forward to next year's when we can get together and catch up and hear about all your lockdown adventures. Anyway, on that note, let's hear about data discovery and so on. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Andrew. And yes, indeed, our next panel covers the science of data discovery and the art of implementation for business value. I'll ask our experts to introduce themselves briefly, and just a quick reminder to our delegates that you can, of course, respond to our poll questions on the panel to the right of your video. And there you will also find a box to put your questions to our experts. We'll ask them throughout the panel so we don't get to the end and have no time left for them. So just post them there, and we'll answer as many as we can as we go along. So let me start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and their firms briefly. Brian, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Greenberg. I am the business enablement lead in our enterprise data management group here at BNY Mellon. I work with the various lines of business and the chief data officers of those business lines to implement enterprise data strategy.
Thank you very much indeed. And over to you, Randy.
Hi, I'm Randy Gordon. I work in the data governance office of Citi Private Bank, which is part of Citi Global Wealth. And my focus is on implementing the enterprise data governance program within Private Bank, make sure we're in compliance, and also working with the business itself to look for opportunities to maximize the use of data for business growth and new opportunities.
Thank you very much indeed. And Fiona.
Hello, everyone. My name's Fiona, and I head up the machine learning team at Didactics. We specialize in data quality, preparation, and matching at scale. And we have clients in the finance and governmental sectors. And we help our clients with things like monitoring, measuring their data quality through to tasks such as compliance to regulations and single customer view.
Thank you. And over to you, Linda.
Hello there, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Kaufman. I am Executive Vice President at SmartStream Technologies for the RDU business line, the reference data utility. Happy to be here today.
Thank you. And Peggy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peggy Tsai. I'm the VP of Data Solutions at BigID. BigID is a machine learning discovery platform where we help to discover and automate the data insights that can be connected through all your data sources. I focus on our product strategy and our data.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed. And let's move on to the questions. And coming to you first, Brian, how would you define data discovery and its potential benefits?
Oh, I'm sorry. My screen just did something very strange. One second.
I can see you.
There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So when it comes to data discovery, certainly here at BNY Mellon, what we've noticed most is the need to identify authoritative sources of data. The consumers of data historically within the firm have been responsible not only for producing whatever reports or dashboards they're producing, but also identifying the right data to use to create those dashboards, those reports. And as you can imagine, if you leave it up to the consumers to identify the right place, different consumers are going to identify different sources. And with that comes inaccuracy, it comes duplication, it comes dozens or hundreds of reconciliation processes that need to be done to make sure that one report matches the other, et cetera. So, from my perspective, the most important thing we could do around data discovery is to identify for each business function or each capability, what is the authoritative source of the data? Where should everyone be going? Because if everyone uses the same source, then there's no need for reconciliation, right? And who knows what the authoritative source of the data is? The people who produce that data, right? So we've gone back to the data producers. We've given them a mountain to stand on and a megaphone to shout through, and they can say, this is the authoritative source of pricing data or of transaction data or what have you. They make that known to everyone who wants to consume data. And we create a catalog or a glossary of those data sets, and we allow folks who need to consume data to have a central place to go do that search. So that's been our focus over the last 6 to 9 months. We've had a great deal of success with that regard, and I've seen regulatory programs, I've seen large change efforts streamline their data sourcing strategies and and generate more accurate, more complete data just by knowing the right place to go.
Okay, thank you very much. And Linda, coming to you, Brian has discussed some of the things that they've been doing and how good it has been. Where do you see the benefits in data discovery?
I think it really can be tied back to dollars, which we all like to do. So from a cost perspective, we've seen where there's multiple user groups paying for the same data, right? Because there's not an authoritative source. So you have somebody sourcing a certain set of data, maybe from one provider, another sourcing the same set of data from another provider. You have multiple. So if you have that data discovery process down, then that's not going to happen. You have multiple operations teams, front, middle, back office, managing the same set of data. So, and trying to interpret it. One person can interpret value, a field coming from the same provider as one thing in the front office, another thing in the middle office, another thing in the back office. So when you have that cataloging done right that Brian described, you no longer get into that inconsistency, which then leads to breaks and operational overhead. And then lastly, I would say true business value. So I'm sure Peggy's going to talk a lot about this maybe in some of her responses, but if you are investing in AI and you're investing in a bunch of shiny tools that use and depend on that data, by not having a clear understanding and ownership of the data and being able to do data discovery to understand what your firm actually has in-house, you're not going to get the best value from all of the fancy bells and whistles that you're developing. And so I think that true business value will come from being able to understand the data in-house and do proper data discovery.
Thank you. Peggy, what would you add there? I think you take a slightly wider view here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Brian and Linda are saying. They're mentioning about creating a catalog, certainly for the importance of identifying authoritative data sources. But just to take a step back, before even building that catalog, it's the inventorying process. It's the ability to really look through your entire data landscape and being able to automatically identify the new data that comes in and be able to process it and catalog it correctly. So I would say that data discovery is a foundational part of any data management program, but it's also a fairly new concept, I think, for many organizations to take on formally in their data governance program. So a lot of customers that we look at today, they're challenged by, similar with Brian, many growing data sets, challenges with scaling their organization as they grow into new product lines, new regions, geography regions. So being able to really understand and automate the identification of new data is really the biggest challenge. I love Linda's response about benefits. It is all about dollars, but if you look across the organization, it's not just the chief data officer that has to be concerned with data discovery. It's also the responsibility of the chief privacy officer and the chief security officer. And if you look about in terms of security, they've been around for a long time now, looking at classifying, finding data, sensitive data, and being able to be compliant for data access and being in compliance with GDPR and CCPA. So really, the benefits, the purpose of data discovery is shared amongst many C-suite executives. So really thinking about the concepts of data discovery and being able to scale it across many business teams and many business stakeholders.
Okay, great start. Thank you. And let's ask our first audience question. It's a poll question, and it asks, what are the challenges of data discovery at your organization? You can select as many of the options as you like. And while you do that, let me come back to Peggy, who touched on challenges a moment ago, but can you round up on that, Peggy? Where do you see the challenges of getting data discovery right?
Thanks, Sarah. I really see two main challenges here. So when I think about data discovery and how to really get it right, I like to compare and contrast that with the concept of data quality. So if you ask any organization, how do you do data quality, there's automatically a handbook. There's a process and procedure about how to do data quality. But if you ask organizations, how do you procedurally do data discovery, I think there's a bit more hesitation on how that's done. And I think it's really important that data discovery is not a standalone exercise that's done by your technology team or your architecture team. Really has to be embraced by the business stakeholders, because data discovery needs to be embraced, enriched, verified by your data stewards, your business stakeholders, really validating the information that is discovered and put into a catalog or inventory. And I think another second challenge I like to say is just the perception of what data discovery is. And I think data discovery is not a magic bullet. It's not going to be an 100% perfect way of finding and identifying all your data perfectly. I think in the past, a lot of the misconceptions has been around the fact that there have been a lot of false positives around data discovery tools. There's been a lot of limitations in terms of technology, really only looking at regular expression or exact pattern matching. And I think that's where a lot of the inaccuracies around some of the data discovery tool results have been. So there's been some concerns about leveraging automation and machine learning for data discovery. So really thinking about in context of having data discovery as part of a holistic data governance program, having the right people, the right subject matter experts to participate in this process is really critical to making data discovery successful in any organization.
Thank you. And coming to you, Randy, what would you add here in terms of challenges? You're a practitioner, so you've had to take these on. So what do you say?
Sure, thanks. And I'll pick up on some of Peggy's points for, I think, some practical challenges I think any large financial institution is going to face. One is the sheer volume and variety of the data. You not only have all types of data, but you have data for all types of customers, all types of products, right? Consumer products, commercial products. That makes understanding the context of the data really critical and difficult. And I'll give you a real live example I once ran into was I was trying to upload a file from an institutional credit system, and the scanning software, I don't know what tool was in use, actually picked up on the fact that there were credit card numbers in the file, except they weren't credit card numbers. They were 16-digit internal instrument identifiers. Now that's an interesting discovery, right? But if you think about what's needed to put that into context and understand this data is actually commercial rather than consumer, and the factors that might go into making that determination, that's complex, and that's just part of what one would run into with a global bank. But also along with that, if a global bank is looking for a global solution and looking to inventory data globally, then you're going to have to run into cross-border regulations and working through cross-border permissions. And that gets to not only accessing the data, but where the data you're extracting for analysis will go, where the software is run, where the data is stored. And you know, I've been through that process. It's very complex and time consuming. So that is certainly a challenge I think a global institution faces.
Thank you. Fiona, what would you add?
So I'm actually thinking of our clients, and we often see a spectrum of capabilities and where institutions are in terms of their maturity and their data journey as well. So I think that sort of then highlights other areas that Randy and Peggy have highlighted in terms of, where you are with your data governance framework. Are you at the start of your journey, or are you well established with that? Right through to data quality. And actually often, we're asked by clients, what's my data, or what data quality rules should I be using as well. So feeding that type of information in, and then it goes right back to the first part of the discussion in terms of talking about assignment of ownership and responsibility of the data, right through to security and accessibility. And then understanding those regulations and legal implications and security of your data as well. And I really like the point that Randy had raised in terms of context and the importance of trying to embed this context, especially whenever you are trying to discover data, within your lake, for example, and uncover those relationships and make use of things like your metadata catalogs and building that out to build that context in.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And let's look at the poll results and see what our audience is thinking in terms of challenges. Okay, Randy, can I come back to you? You talked about the challenges you've come across. How do the stats look to you?
I think this is very interesting. It's interesting that the most frequent response was no single source of truth. I think that's the nature of a large institution. So part of what you're discovering is the variety of sources of potential truth. So I think that would be a natural issue to hit initially, but I think that's part of what data discovery can help with exactly, is identifying all the different sources of the same data and then working through that to identify what should be the source of truth. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
if I could jump in, Sarah.
Sure.
This is heartening to me to see this result, because it suggests that we're moving down the right path. There are, as Randy said, there are multiple sources. All of us have multiple sources of the same data, right? And there are tools that we've been discussing that can automate the discovery of those and the reconciliation of those, et cetera. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, the people who know what the authoritative source is are the people who produce the data. And what I found is, somewhat surprisingly, I guess, this is not a controversial question. Right. If I produce, a particular, say I produce FX transactions, I know exactly what the authoritative source is for FX transactions. There's no debate. If anyone asked me, I would always give the same answer. The trick is getting people to ask me, as opposed to asking other colleagues or other people that have found other sources and have had success. Oh, use this system because I've used it in the past, it worked for me, et cetera. And so, what I would suggest and encourage is, automate, absolutely, but don't leave out the human experience at the source, right? Let's find out where the right places are, where the right authoritative sources are, and then use those sources as input to all these tools, right? When we establish our glossaries, we populate our data lakes, and we identify what the consumable data sets are available. Start with what the people producing the data are telling you the right places to go. And then what falls out of that is all of the non-authoritative sources, all of the ones that are aggregators or created for particular use cases, et cetera. And we can drive people away from those sources towards the authoritative sources, and some of our problems start to get smaller. Some of our reconciliation issues, some of our AI tools that need to differentiate between sources suddenly have an easier job, because we're identifying some certainties that allow us to have better inputs into those models.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And let's move on to our next question. And can I come to you, Linda, to tell us a little bit about holistic approaches that can be taken to resolve these kinds of challenges?
Yeah, I think that allowing users to, you do all this work, and Brian's been describing some of the activities that they're working on, and that makes sense. But then how do you, as he just mentioned, bring in the human experience? So giving users an easy way to see the data even before it's integrated maybe into your more wide user platforms, right? So if you're getting data from source A and B, and maybe you've only integrated 3/4 of that into your data lake or into your security master, but the user is now wanting to understand about that 25%. Usually catalogs stop short, or I've seen catalogs stop short at what is available in-house that you can access through the normal chains of command. And being able to make the data, kind of give them a sandbox, a data sandbox to play in, to say, hey, we do have these other data values. So when you're developing your models, when you're developing your whatever product you're doing, if you give them access to that and kind of a play area, then they help to define the authoritative source for you, almost, as they bring more and more data attributes into scope. So I think that's one, giving them access to that. Better cross-referencing, believe it or not, between data providers, so that users don't feel boxed into one provider. So if you, sometimes you see these kind of non-authoritative source pockets of data happening because either they couldn't get what they wanted from the authoritative source, or they couldn't connect the dots. So they just pushed over to another source that isn't the authoritative source for the firm, maybe worse quality, so they're spending more money cleansing it. But if you can help them connect the dots between sources, I think that also helps. And then my last one is clear and clean definition. So my example that I give that stuck with me over the years is we had one organization where one of their data providers, authoritative sources, had a field called country, right? Just country. And there were about 10 different users, all thinking of this, interpreting this value differently. So some it was country of the issuer, some it was country of the trade, where the trading's happening, some country where the parent company was domiciled. I mean, you name it. And it was the one field. So having that, we keep talking about the catalog, we're getting boring talking about catalogs all the time, but having that clear, concise definition available to everybody, so there's not that misinterpretation, I think holistically will drive better efficiencies.
Thank you, Linda. And Fiona, what would you add there in terms of approaching these challenges?
So a very broad approach would firstly be embedding that culture of data responsibility and understanding within an organization. So that goes from your C-suite executives right down to your data engineers and on the technical side as well, and having that as a priority and an impetus, as opposed to like a checkbox exercise. So that's a rather broad stroke and not something that's very simply resolved. And that includes, skilling up and training, because this area is constantly changing. Regulations are updating and changing. For example, we've got the potential of new AI regulations in the EU coming down the line. Keeping an eye on best practices. Security is always moving and keeping up to date with that, and privacy. And I think of what we've touched on as well as, accountability is key. So, assigning those roles and responsibilities. So as Brian was saying, we know who the key owner of this one single data set of truth is. And then I suppose, I think Peggy will probably talk about this in terms of the data governance. So you've got many policies, and it's maybe integrating these policies. So you've got policies around data privacy, ethics, security, and quality, and so on, and having a holistic view of those. And then finishing off with best practices that Linda's highlighted really well in terms of having, your standardized data model across a company. That's a really interesting example of the country field there, Linda, through to, building your data catalogs, categorizing your data in terms of risk, in terms of regulation, and so on as well. So broad strokes down to best practices.
Okay, that's great. We have a couple of audience questions, I think probably for our practitioners. And I'm going to put the first one to you, Brian. And it asks, how can we control data discovery to make sure the data isn't duplicated? We don't end up with different versions of the same data and so on. In other words, how do we make sure it's not a mess?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we've established a certification process with strong governance around it. Like I said, we start with the producers. And so the question really boils down to what happens if two producers both claim to be the authoritative source of the same data, right? If it's one producer and they have two different sources, then frankly, they need to pick one, right? Where would you send people if asked, right? But if two people both believe they're the same, they're the authoritative source, then that's highlighting an inherent issue within the organization that needs to be resolved, right? And then the governance process can kick in, bring those two groups together, and let's just agree where should we be sending people when they need this type of data, right? And it's also very important to cut it not too fine and not too coarse, right? What is the business concept or business function that we are describing? Linda's example is a great one, right? So, country data, regions, internal legal entities, et cetera. Some of this stuff is the purview of the client data team or the KYC team. Some of it's the purview of legal or finance, right? And so that data might exist in both of those places, and they need to agree on who's going to be the authoritative source and who's going to be what we call an authorized provisioning point, right? Who's going to be a place you can go, but what they're doing is they're giving you the data from the authoritative source. So, long answer, but the short summary is governance and, constant communication and dialogue with the producers to agree on the right answer.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Coming to you, Randy. This is perhaps a little tricky, but let's see how it goes. And it says, handling sensitive data and upholding PII is a big concern, but we have a limited budget. How should we make the business case for these types of tools?
Well, I think institutions are aware of the penalties that are involved if that data is not handled correctly. And they're also aware of their particular data landscape in terms of how sprawling it may be, right? So I think starting with the business case that you need to understand where this data is, first and foremost. I mean, governance and all that, I think, comes from first knowing where it is. So the work involved in trying to do this without such a tool, the kinds of tools we're talking about, data discovery tools, is immense. And you can work up, I think, a cost benefit argument that doing that manually or doing that through custom queries or however is going to cost a lot in resources and time. And so, and it's not going to be sustainable. And you have to be able to sustain this. Your infrastructure is always changing. Your data structure is always changing. So I actually think there's a very compelling case to be made if you just start with that. Start with, it's critical you know where your PII is, and there's no alternative in a cost-effective way to do this without such a tool.
Okay, thank you. I think, Linda, it was you who mentioned cross-referencing data sources. And the question is, if I'm correct, could you talk about the types of tools and techniques you have used to help users cross-reference the data sources? Are these about conversations or fields in a catalog?
A little bit about both. So depending on what the set of data is, it brings on its own challenges as far as cross-referencing goes. We tend to do more, financial instrument cross-referencing, but we have found that automating that cross-referencing and putting a nice data quality program around it has allowed for clients to be able to easily maneuver between different sources of data, and it hasn't boxed them in. And so I think that it's definitely a combination. I tend to always lean in that everything's a combination of human expertise and machine automation. But for cross-referencing, a lot of it can be automated.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. And we're going to ask you now to fill in the answers to another poll question. This time, how integrated are data consumers like data scientists with business teams at your organization? And while you answer the question, let me ask Randy to talk about the role of data consumers, data scientists being one example in data discovery as opposed to data producers. These terms have come up already. How do you see it?
So I think this is a really interesting question. And I'm going to answer it based on how I can ideally see data consumers using these tools. I haven't necessarily had the opportunity myself, but getting back to one of Linda's ideas of having a sandbox, I think if you gave data consumers, including data scientists, the access to this discovered data that they can't have access to, obviously, permissions need to be in place. And then I think it's really important to encourage users, the consumers, to ask open-ended questions about the data, because I think that's where the real value can come. So instead of just asking for, okay, where's PII, where are 16-digit numbers, that's important information. But if you want to start extracting value, the questions should be more open-ended. I was thinking of, tell me where all the examples are of unique identifiers for individual customers. Because we know in most institutions, there are multiple identifiers for customers. There are external identifiers and regulatory identifiers and various internal identifiers, and some are legacy and some are up to date. But that's really interesting information. That can give you insights into customers, can give you insights into how to become more efficient. Where you seem to have customers you can't identify, now you know. So that's an open-ended question. I think on the producer side, getting back to that comment about, I think, Linda, you made about accurate metadata. I think it's really important for data producers to provide descriptions of data and whatever metadata repository they're using that really are filled with business meaning, because that will allow your data discovery tools to more accurately understand what this data is, what these data sources hold.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Brian, what would you add to that in terms of data consumers?
I think I agree with a lot of what Randy said, all of what Randy said, obviously. The thing I would add, I think, is around the type of consumer you're dealing with. I've noticed as we start to populate our glossary and our catalog and some of the other tools we're talking about here, there's a distinction between the more technical consumer and the more business-minded consumer. So, I'd be mindful of, if someone is going and searching for FX transactions, I'll use my example from before, and what they get back from their search is a set of table names and column names, as opposed to data sets, as opposed to definitions of the data. Linda made the point about what do we mean by country, that kind of thing. I think you can very easily provide a lot of information to people without providing a lot of knowledge, wisdom, or insight, right? So there's a distinction between that kind of that raw technical data that a lot of these tools kind of live and breathe in, and what some of the consumers are looking to gather. Data scientists, an interesting mix of that paradigm, right? There are certainly those who really want to get into down to the data, the columns and the tables and the columns and the metadata, et cetera. And then there are some that really need the definitions and the functional understanding of what they're looking at in order to populate their models correctly, right? So I think separating out what the tools are looking at versus what they're producing is a key piece when dealing with the consumers.
Thank you. Let's look at the poll results, if we may, and see how integrated the data consumers are with the business teams. Right. Peggy, would you like to comment on those results?
It's really interesting. I mean, there's clearly, the first choice integration is limited to a limited extent. To work together occasionally. So that just shows to me that there's still a gap, right, between the data consumers are with the actual business teams. So I think closing that gap is really key for the holistic governance that we're all talking about today.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And let's move on. We're coming near to the end of our time. So let's run through some of the technologies, tools and solutions that can be helpful here with data discovery. Fiona, would you like to start?
Yeah. So there really is a rainbow of tools and solutions. So here goes. But it really again depends on where you are in your data discovery journey and also maybe how much expertise and technology you have, for example, in-house already. So you've got a real range from data lineage and visualization tools, and we can see how a lot of these tools are being augmented. For example, data lineage being augmented with data quality metrics as it flows through an institution. Then technology to aid, for example, with metadata management. So maybe adding in more of that contextual information that Randy has been discussing on here. And then the use of natural language processing approaches to then pick out that contextual information. But again, it really all depends on having good quality contextual data already stored within your system in order to do that. No code platforms to help subject matter experts with things with measuring, monitoring their data quality, improving their data quality. Right through to things like graphs and graph analysis to uncover potential links and relationships between data as systems get larger and more complex. And then the use of machine learning to augment. I really liked what Linda was saying about, that human in the loop approach as well. So augmenting things like classification of data, uncovering dependencies, recommending data sets to users and so on. So a real spectrum of approaches there.
Thank you. Peggy, what would you advise here?
So first and foremost, Big ID is a discovery solution that leverages AI machine learning. But a lot of the times when I talk to customers, new customers about what are they looking for in a data discovery tool, there's some standard questions I like to always ask them is, are you ensuring that the technology that you're looking at can connect to all your different types of data sources? So we're not just talking about a scope of structured data. There's unstructured, there's documents, PDF files, emails, messaging, data pipelines, data movement to the cloud. So there's different types of data that needs to be part of the scope of governance. And I think that ensuring that your solution has that broad coverage for all your applications and all your data sources is key. The second thing is not just finding the data. I think Randy and Fiona said it best, is finding the right data in the right context. And I think there's a lot of nuances in new technologies, natural language processing, as well as being able to really identify not just the metadata but the understanding the data itself and being able to learn from your organization's data, as well as being able to leverage a lot of industry data sets out there to help automatically label and classify the data. It's really key to help with data discovery and really understand the right context. Certainly, Fiona and I, we come from more of a data science background, so there's a lot of technical techniques here that can really be established in terms of looking at, data similarities, clustering of data, being able to tie and trace the data across different data silos. I think those are all key to helping unlock the data discovery story here today.
Thank you. And Linda, what would you suggest here?
I think everybody's touched on so many. I don't know if I have much to add. I guess I would circle back to earlier when I was talking about the sandbox, but we have one client in particular that I really love what they did with virtualization and making it easy for downstream users, as I mentioned before, to access all the data that's available. And one thing that we didn't touch on is the procurement piece of this, right? So oftentimes you could buy a package of data and there's data available to your firm and you don't really know that you're paying for that data. So making sure that when you're doing your data discovery that you include the market procurement team in the mix is quite important. I know I'd sidetracked a little from tools there, but I just was thinking about that. So I would say virtualization tools, everything that Fiona and Peggy mentioned, plus I think more on the virtualization side, especially if you're talking to your tech, as Brian said, there's the tech and the business side of things. So if you're talking to the tech side, they love APIs, they love virtualization where they could just get their hands on the data and start playing with it. And then of course, everything that was mentioned around context and making sure that the business side also has that access.
Thank you very much indeed. We have a rather last minute audience question, and Randy, I'm going to put this one to you again as a practitioner. Here we go. We are trying to get better control over our unstructured data, but the data volumes we have to handle are very large and our data is stored in many different repositories. Can you share any tips on how to approach this? Is a centralized approach best?
I think a centralized approach is best, but it's a big challenge. I think of experiences we've had in some of my former companies, just sorting through shared folders and SharePoint sites. I think that's where you have to ultimately, whatever your tool, really rely on the human aspect, because unstructured data, it's very hard to pin down sometimes, very hard to pin down where it came from, what exactly is in it. And what we did, I think, at one of my former companies, we basically identified owners for each of these repositories of unstructured data, and they were ultimately responsible for having the answers that we couldn't get from whatever software we were using to do discovery. I just think that's the nature of unstructured data. It's very hard to read.
Okay, anybody like to add a comment there?
Yeah, I'll just throw in. Sometimes unstructured data is supporting documentation and it's intended to be unstructured. You need repositories, you need search tools, et cetera. And sometimes unstructured data is structured data hiding in unstructured containers, right? And if that's what you're looking at, if you've got a document you're trying to pull data out of, I would look to some of the tools we're discussing here and, step one, convert that unstructured data into the structured data you need, and then proceed from there. Don't try to have a kind of a broad approach to unstructured data without considering what you want it to be, right? I would start there.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And we've just got a couple of minutes. So a sentence from everybody, please, about what we'll be talking about in terms of data discovery and its associated and analytics, perhaps next year. Where shall we start? Brian.
Oh, what are we going to talk about next year? Hopefully we'll be talking about how good it is to be in the same room.
And that.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think, I think as is mostly the case, it's about moving from information to knowledge and then to wisdom, right? We're making great strides and we've got some great tools now to get rid of the reconciliations, to get the data, to get the authoritative sources in one place and to get it out to the people. And now it's a question of how are they going to use it? How can we help help them use it in the best way. So hopefully some of the things we're discussing now as kind of solved but not yet implemented problems are now implemented and passed. And now we're talking about the next hill to climb. That's my goal. That's my hope anyway.
Thanks. Randy, a few words from you here.
Well, what I'd like to see is that we have discussions about pooling the individual learnings, because any machine learning tool, each customer has to go through teaching it. I think if there's a way to generalize those learnings, especially about context, and find a way to pull that as a library that all users can access. I know the IP considerations are going to be very complex, but you're getting from machine learning to a learned machine then. And I think that's a really exciting place to go.
Thank you. Fiona, what do you see going forward?
I love that idea, Randy, because we build machine learning models, and that's one of the hardest part is building your data set. So I think that's a fantastic idea. And actually within the next year, it would be great to see us moving along in terms of augmenting the data discovery process with machine learning to address those rather manual, time-consuming tasks. With those learnings. So that's will be great to do for the year.
Thank you. Linda, a few words from you too, please.
Yeah, I think we're all saying automation is going to be a big piece of the puzzle, no matter how you slice or dice it. And I think that we're going to find that the reason that everything is that there are no authoritative sources at some firms, or that we're struggling to do that, is that the information flow from the users inward is not clear all the time. So I would like to see, the automation being driven not just from owner out, but also from consumer in. So I'm hoping that we see tools take that into account more often.
Thank you. And some final words from you, Peggy.
So Randy, I really like your idea, and I'm going to see how I can put that into a product roadmap. But I think as more organizations really mature in their data discovery, I think embedding those insights directly into the end user, directly into the hands of the data scientists, the ones that are actually manipulating and reporting on the data, is really key. We don't want that friction between actually discovering, cataloging, all that curation work to be a hurdle for our data consumers. So really making that seamless and making this a really easy process for our end users to ultimately do their actions, take actions, and get the data intelligence that they need. So really helping to further along the data discovery is something I really see it's going to happen in the next year or two.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for taking part in this panel. And now it's time for me to hand back over to Andrew.